Hello, my name is Morgan Kessler, Oxnard City Engineer, and this presentation is to accompany the staff report for the Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2025 to 2029. This is prepared for the April 23rd, 2024 Public Works and Transportation Committee, as well as the May 21st, 2024 City Council meeting. Staff recommends that the Public Works and Transportation Committee provide input on the draft Capital Improvement Program, or term CIP, and recommend that the City Council, one, hold a public hearing to receive public testimony regarding the proposed 2025 to 2029 City of Oxnard 5-year CIP, and two, approve the project prioritization lists in categories 3 and 4 outlined in the staff report, and adopt the 2025 to 2029 City of Oxnard 5-year CIP, and 3, direct staff to finalize the 2025 to 2029 CIP and general fund and Measure O amounts for the Category 4 projects once the city's fiscal year 2024 to 2025 operating budget has been completed as approved CIP funding allows. Staff also recommends that the City Council, one, hold a public hearing to receive public testimony regarding the proposed 2025 to 2029 City of Oxnard 5-year CIP, and two, approve the project prioritization lists in categories 3 and 4 outlined in the staff report and adopt the 2025 to 2029 City of Oxnard 5-year CIP, and 3, direct staff to finalize the 2025 to 2029 CIP and general fund and Measure O amounts for Category 4 projects once the city's fiscal year 2024 to 2025 operating budget has been completed as approved CIP funding allows. The 5-year CIP is a planning and budgeting tool for the city's capital, or sometimes referred to as major infrastructure construction and repair projects. The CIP is programmed over a rolling 5-year window and is reassessed and brought to City Council every 2 years. Staff also brings updates to the City Council in between the full update years. It should be noted that the CIP does not include projects and activities considered to be routine maintenance. We talk about the CIP as a whole. However, it should be kept in mind that it is essentially made of 2 parts: the capital budget and the capital program. The capital budget piece is what gets included into the annual city budget as the funds identified specifically for CIP projects. This identified funding is programmed or scheduled to be used across a 5-year fiscal year span, and the first 1 or 2 years is the amount that is included into the annual budget. This year, the CIP is slightly ahead schedule-wise of the fiscal year 24 to 25 budget approval process, and once the City Council approves the CIP and its recommended project priorities and programming, the CIP will become part of the overall budget approval process. There are many challenges to both individual projects and the entire CIP, and these include things like limited funding, staffing and workload issues, grant deadlines, increasing materials and construction prices, and the inability of the city to issue municipal bonds. Since the pandemic, staffing challenges and high construction prices have made funding and carrying out the CIP projects especially challenging. In response, on February 7th last year, the City Council received a report from the City Manager's Office outlining these issues and recommended that the city modify, or as the staff memo is sometimes referred to as slow down, the timeline and expectations of the CIP project delivery, at least for the next 2 or few fiscal years until staffing levels could be restored and work and construction pricing stabilized. The result of this action was that the list of CIP projects at the time were determined to be either above the line or below the line, meaning any projects above the line could move forward with current staffing and funding levels, while those determined to be below the line would be postponed pending more staff workload capacity. Since then, staff has developed a set of project categories numbered 1 through 4. Later in the presentation, we will describe each of these in more detail, but for now, above the line projects can be thought of as those in category 1. A key role of the CIP is to show where a project's funding comes from. In Oxnard, projects can be paid for by multiple sources. For example, a park could have several different grants, development impact fees, and other funds associated with it. One funding mechanism that is not presently available to the city is that of paying for large projects with the revenue from issued municipal bonds. Bonding is used by every city, county, and state in the U.S. and works roughly in the way that a home buyer purchases a house with a mortgage. Presently, bonding is not available to Oxnard due to a lawsuit by the political corporation moving Oxnard forward. The lawsuit was initially defeated in court. However, the plaintiffs appealed and the matter won't be resolved for at least the next 2 to 3 years. The consequence of the lawsuit is it has hampered the city's ability to do large projects in a timely manner. The CIP contains many projects, and they could not be done all at once, even if funding and staff workload were not issues. To figure out what projects to do and when, staff has developed a prioritization process. The first step in this process is to categorize the nature of the project into classifications of health and safety, asset preservation, or new and expanded services. Following this, the project is looked at from perspectives of constraints like grant deadlines, staff workload, council priorities, and a number of other things. Once these constraints are vetted out and applied, projects are placed into one of the 4 categories. These categories and the projects they contain are included as attachments to this report and presentation. Category 1 is comprised of those CIP projects that are already funded and have been approved in previous CIPs. These are generally considered as ready to go and move forward. Referring to the February 2023 report to council, Category 1 projects are thought of as above the line. Category 2 includes those projects previously funded and approved like Category 1 projects, but were determined to be of lower priority and consequently their start dates were postponed. These projects are considered below the line from the council action in February 2023. For this present CIP cycle, the various city departments were asked to identify new CIP projects that they wanted to include. The new projects also had information about their funding source. This category, Category 3, includes projects that have known funding sources and are recommended by staff for inclusion in the present CIP. These are also of such priority that staff recommends placing these ahead of those in Category 2. The last category, Category 4, contains projects both existing and new projects that have no identified funding or are only partially funded. But the commonality is that they have a high priority. Examples of these are the citywide paving projects, where the inability of Oxnard to bond has created a funding gap between the approximately $23.3 million needed in the city's annual gas tax revenue, which this year is around only $5.2 million. Projects in this category could be funded with general fund or Measure O, should there be any excess after the general fund obligations are met. The CIP development process involves most city divisions and requires a series of steps to move forward the completed document. The process begins with working with the departments to identify capital needs. Once this information is gathered and checked for consistency with the general plan, the new projects are prioritized per the procedure mentioned earlier. Once the CIP document is updated with new completed and sometimes removed projects, the draft is taken to the Planning Commission for determination that the projects are compliant with the general plan. Then it goes to Public Works and Transportation Committee for their input and recommendation. And finally, to the City Council for final acceptance of the projects, their priority, and funding. The present CIP effort differed from previous ones in that much of the old records and files associated with past efforts were lost with recent staffing changes. The city also began using a new financial system since the last iteration of the CIP, and the development process needed to be changed and sort of reinvented to work within the parameters of the new financial system. The completed CIP document will be available in printed form as well as posted online for viewing and download. The CIP is structured beginning with introductory material, including narratives about the 5 project types, and these are buildings, parks and open space, seawalls, information technology, transportation and drainage, and utilities. The next section of the CIP document, the biggest, includes all of the projects, with the exception of those that are completely unfunded, and these appear in the back of the document as an appendix. Lastly, there are several supporting appendices at the end of the document. The project pages are in a 1 project per page format, and each page contains a title, brief project purpose and description, a location map, funding and fiscal year programming data, and project manager contact information. For this present CIP, staff used a module of the city's OpenGov system to develop the project pages, and the CIP may be functionally tied to the city's financial enterprise systems in future CIP development cycles. Determining the list of projects for Quimby-funded parks projects is on a different, yet parallel timeline to the CIP development. Although Quimby projects ultimately wind up as projects in the CIP, the identification of these projects must be determined through city staff meeting with individuals or groups of neighborhood councils to discuss the use of Quimby funds for projects. Once this is done, any new parks projects will be added to the CIP via a separate action item to the Public Works and Transportation Committee and City Council later this calendar year. In the interim, staff has reserved enough workload bandwidth in the proposed CIP to accommodate these Quimby projects once they are determined. On its way towards adoption, the CIP will be presented before the Public Works and Transportation Committee, the Planning Commission, and finally the City Council. For the Public Works and Transportation Committee, staff recommends that the committee provide input on the proposed new projects and continuing projects, and that they provide comments and/or changes on the prioritization within categories 2, 3, and 4. And lastly, that they recommend forwarding to the council for approval. Financial impacts for the CIP are dependent on the category for which the projects are listed. Beginning with category 1, there's no real financial impact because the projects here were previously approved by City Council action with funding allocated at that time, and no new amounts are being requested as part of the CIP. Again, these are all above the line projects as described earlier in the presentation. Similarly, category 2 projects have no financial impact as these have been previously approved and their funding has been allocated, similar to category 1. The distinguishing difference with this category is that it contains the below the line projects that have been given less priority and are not as time sensitive to complete. The next grouping, made up of newly proposed projects for the present CIP, this is category 3. Its projects have funding identified from sources like grants, development impact fees, and other sources. Category 3 projects are not requesting new general fund resources. Also, because of prioritization factors mentioned earlier, staff suggests this category of projects be given a higher priority than category 2. Finally, category 4 projects are both new and existing projects, some with high priority that have only partial, such as from gas tax revenue, or no new identified funding. Staff recommends that these be funded in order of the listed priority in category 4 and ahead of those in category 2, pending the outcome of the city-wide operating budget process. Below the category 4 priority list are the unfunded projects. These are projects that have at some point been identified for inclusion in the CIP, but that have not had funding sources associated with them. They are periodically reviewed by staff to ensure that they are still needed, and also in case they match up with a new or one-time funding source. Finally, it should be noted that projects approved by City Council in prior fiscal years that have not yet been completed will have their respective unencumbered budgets rolled forward. Thank you for viewing this presentation. Staff will be available at the Public Works and Transportation Committee and the City Council meetings to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.